Recently, my partner and I have been hearing random banging noises throughout the whole flat, to the point where we check to make sure the front door is locked and search every room to see whether or not anything has changed position or we notice something odd. We left the lounge door open the other night, and once we woke up, it was closed. The thing that has brought me to share my experience with you was to ask whether people believe in paranormal activity during hours of light. Because this afternoon around 12:30 p.m, I was lay on the bed with my heavily pregnant partner just watching some TV as we're both recovering from an illness. But all of a sudden, our ears felt like they had a buzzing sensation. So my partner suggested turning down the TV, and I responded, I'd rather just turn the TV off. And as soon as I said off, it suddenly switched off by itself, and the Freeview box was still lit green, so that was on. Next thing, our dog Mimi is staring at something right next to my right side of the bed, and I felt a surreal, cold, tingling, shivering, weird sensation all throughout my body. Pretty much freaked out. Other things seemed to happen, such as the kitchen light flickering, unexplained knocks and bangs. The dog sometimes looks around the room as if she's following something, and also barks and growls towards whatever it is. My partner heard someone coming through the front door and heard them making a cup of tea, but it turned out nobody was there. The dog's brush, which we keep on a top shelf in the lounge, had ended up on the floor the next morning. When we record around the room with the flash on, you can see the light orbs often around rooms in the flat. We are staying at her granddad's vacant flat whilst he stays elsewhere due to coronavirus going on. Does anyone else believe in spirits or ghosts? Do you believe they're harmless to us humans living here in the physical world? We moved into my mum's house when I was around 10 years old. Initially, we never noticed anything strange going on, but I'd say things started happening in the first year of living there. I don't know how many ghosts there are, only that there is one, and we call it Rosie. My 6-year-old brother was the first one to mention anything. See, when you entered my bedroom, there was a window on the wall straight across from the door. You had to pass my room to get to my brother's, and if the door is open, you can see the window. He ran to me crying one day, saying he saw a girl in my room in front of the window. He said she had shoulder-length hair and glasses. This could be nothing more than childhood imagination, but he was definitely pretty spooked by it. The second thing I remember was a while later, and probably the thing that scared me most. My older sister convinced me to switch bedrooms with her, because I had the master, and it was bigger than hers. Our house was one of those houses that's halfway underground, so even though it was all the same floor, some of the windows were ground level, and some weren't. The room I moved into is the creepiest room in the house, and I had my bed positioned under a window, which was not ground level. Nothing could reach it from the outside, it was way too high. One night, I was laying in bed trying to sleep, and all of a sudden, something knocked on the window, right above my head. Naturally, I was fucking terrified. I was like 11. I jumped out of bed and ran to my sister's room and told her. Of course, she didn't believe me. A couple days later, it happened again, only this time, she was in the room with me and definitely heard it. She opened the window and looked around, and was yelling that if someone was messing with the window, they'd better stop. It wasn't rocks being thrown or anything, it was the very distinct sound of rapping on a window. Unmistakable. Another time in that room, I was sitting on a couch there reading a book, and my cat was sleeping next to me. I had a bunch of school papers laid out on the bed. As I was reading, I heard them rustling around, but I didn't look up from my book because I assumed it was my cat. It took a couple of moments for me to realise my cat was next to me, and there were no drafts that could possibly make them move. I immediately left the room. A few days later, I casually mentioned it to my sister, and she told me she'd had creepy things happen to her in that room too. She said she had a couple of pencils on a shelf, and that one day it just flew off. Not across the room or anything, it wasn't far. She said it fell in front of the shelf, but there had been just a tiny bit of momentum behind it. I can't say whether that's 100% true or not, given I wasn't there, but from the things I've experienced in the house, I believe it. Over the years, we've had all kinds of little things happen in the house. There's been times when the kitchen cabinets have opened, not in a scary, dramatic way, like in scary movies when you walk into the kitchen, and every single cabinet is wide open. It wasn't like that at all. I'd be sitting on the couch and hear the tiniest squeak of the cabinets, and walk in the kitchen, and one will be like halfway open. We've had doors open and close, the TV goes on and off, things like that. Sometimes I'll sit watching TV and the entire cable box will go off. Once I rolled my eyes and said out loud, "Turn it back on, Rosie," and I shit you not, it started to boot up. That one could be a coincidence, but it's cooler to believe that the ghost listened to me. Now for my personal favourite. This happened 2 or 3 years ago, when my current boyfriend lived there with me before we moved out. We were both 18, and we were sitting on the couch watching a movie. It was maybe midnight. At this point, my sister had a daughter, and I was pregnant myself, so there were baby toys there for when my niece would visit. Among those toys was one of those activity centres for babies, to pull upon and play, like a little table. Well, this thing had been going off for a while, just making all kinds of noises and playing music. I definitely chalked this up to a ghost, because it did it all the time. But it never ever did it until we moved it to my mum's house. I guess it was getting on my boyfriend's nerves, because eventually he says, "Shut the fuck up," to it. He has all kinds of pre-programmed phrases and shit like baby toys do. And before it goes off, it'll say, "Bye-bye." That's what it did after he said that. I jokingly said, "Oh, Rosie's gonna get you tonight." Later, we're in my bedroom, laying down trying to sleep. In the corner, there's a window right next to a closet door. Now, I don't know if this came from the window or the closet, but suddenly, there's a really loud thump from the corner. My boyfriend jolted up, and all I said was, "I told you." Needless to say, he slept on the couch that night. Another time, my boyfriend's little puppy ran past that toy into the kitchen, and the toy said, "Run, little dog, run." That freaked my boyfriend out too. A little backstory of my friends. I met my now best friend at the end of middle school, and we hung out almost every weekend. We'd chill at his mum's house most of the time, and she worked third shift, so when we hung out, we were usually alone. We always presumed his house to be haunted, as we would hear noises and stuff, and that it was literally across the street from a cemetery. Nothing ever happened, and it never seemed threatening, so we actually eventually got used to it. Obviously, we would still react, but we'd be less and less freaked out by it. Time goes by, and we continue to hang out regularly every weekend at their mum's place. Same situation. Their mum works third shift, we're alone most of the time, and small paranormal-ish things happen every so often. We're probably freshmen or sophomores at this time. We would attempt to play online on COD, but their Wi-Fi wasn't the greatest, so we would often play zombies, which we also enjoyed a lot. My friend's brother had to get up early the following day, so on this particular night, he went to bed a little earlier than me and my best friend. We continued to play video games for about another hour or two when we decided to hit the hay. We would sleep in his living room where they had a large L-shaped couch. They would set up the cushions in a way where the dogs couldn't climb up and ruin the couch when they weren't using it, so we had to just take everything down and set up the cushions. As this happened, I heard the floor creak and an odd sound from the end of the hall. Just a weird moaning sound, as if he had just woken up and was tired. As he had just done that, my friend didn't hear it, but I immediately looked down the hall and saw his brother walking across the hall to the bathroom. Not breaking sight of the hallway, I let out a little chuckle, but then proceeded down the hall when I realised I hadn't noticed anything else happening. As I reached the bathroom, the door was slightly cracked, so I quietly called his name to check on him. No answer. I say it again a little louder. Still no answer. but I hear shuffling in his room. I go over and see him turning over in bed. My eyes widen and I freeze. I realize I hadn't looked away from the hallway and never saw him return to his room, but it was him walking to the bathroom. I was freaked out and explained to my friend what I saw, and he was equally freaked out. That was a first for that house, and it took me a while to fall asleep that night, and for about a week following that, for that matter. Still gives me the chills when I think back. I was about 11 or 12 years old when this happened. One night, while I was asleep, I hear my name and someone grab my shoulder. I was sleeping on my side facing the wall, so I roll over and turn around and see this tall person standing right beside me. He had a slight green glow around his whole body. Also, I would like to mention it was very early in the morning, so there was a tiny bit of light, but not a lot. But I could clearly see someone or something standing right next to me. As my eyes adjust to waking up, I assume it's my dad, so I say, "Dad, is that you?" With no response. The person didn't have features that I could see, but I could tell he was looking right at me. After I said that and realized it wasn't my dad, I laid there frozen, not able to move for about 5 seconds, of him just staring at me. It turns around, and I see with my own eyes it just walk through the wall. Even though it was dark, I could see it clearly because of the green glow around him. Also, I would like to mention, I always slept with my door closed, and after we left through the wall, I ran out of my room and the door was still shut. I immediately ran into the bathroom and locked the door, and threw up. I felt super sick and was drenched in sweat. I stayed in the bathroom till it was light out before I went back to my room. I also asked everyone in my family if they went in my room that night, and no one had. This occurred when I was in 4th grade. My school had 2 floors, and my classroom was located on the 2nd floor. Most of the classroom is made up of windows, almost 2 walls worth of them. It was in the afternoon, and we were doing independent working time. As a kid, it was difficult for me to stay on task with my work, so I caught myself staring out the window. Out of nowhere, I spot a weird-looking aircraft. I was still a kid, so I assumed it was an airplane. But the more I noticed, the more I believed it wasn't an airplane, but maybe an aircraft not from here. The aircraft was a dark shade of grey. It looked like the classic circle UFO, as if it had been squashed and then extended. It also had some long, fin-like wings, one on each side, and one on top. It also had very dark tinted windows. I kept staring at it with confusion. It made no noise, and it was passing right by my classroom window. I was in shock. I then looked around my class to see if I wasn't the only one noticing it, but they all had their heads down. It wasn't the type as if they were doing their work, not at all. It was as if they were shut down like a robot. They kept their heads down hanging, they looked lifeless. I kept looking back and forth. I would look at the aircraft, then look around the classroom. It all felt so strange. I remember feeling so nauseous. I looked back at the window and it vanished. In front of the window was a clear view, so I had to see it fly off or pass completely through, but it was gone. Not even a split second passed. Then the bell rang for recess. This was when all the kids perked up and began heading out. They got up as if nothing happened. During recess, I began to tell my friends what had happened, and all they said was, "What are you talking about?" and brushed it off. I kept trying to tell others what happened and they didn't believe me. Currently in my junior year of high school. To this day, I believe it was a UFO or something paranormal. I always feel uneasy when I think about it. So long story short, I've grown up in occupied houses all my life. My mum and grandma practice witchcraft. They're super sensitive to the paranormal, and I guess from all the exposure, the same thing happened to me. I've seen shit at times that I can't explain. had close encounters, and things always seemed to be attracted to my energy. Anyway, September, October last year, my boyfriend and I were in bed asleep. He's a heavy sleeper, so it's hard to get him awake. Do you ever get the dreading sensation that someone is watching you and you don't feel safe? At 3 a.m., I woke up so naturally. I woke up, only to see my bedroom door opening and stopping halfway, and a tall, dark figure standing behind it, so I could see half of its body. And thanks to the lights coming from outside, they made it look like it was completely solid. I've had sleep paralysis before, countless times, and this was nothing like it. It just stared at us for a good minute or two, before then slowly slinking back behind the door and out of sight. Panicking and waking my boyfriend up to get up with me to close the door, we hugged for a minute before going back to bed. The next morning he told me that while we hugged at the door, he heard something coming from the kitchen and hadn't wanted to say anything in case I freaked out more and couldn't sleep. This is coming from someone who's a massive skeptic and has never experienced anything supernatural. I immediately ruled out that it was a shadow person because 1, they're normally smaller, and 2, they hate attention, so it would have just been gone the second I looked at it. So, any ideas? This is a story my family told me. I was too young to remember this apartment. When I was a little kid, my grandparents lived in company housing. My grandfather worked in an oil refinery in Louisiana, and he lived in the previous manager's apartment, on the top floor of one of the refinery's administration buildings. The previous manager, Jack, was a very eccentric man. People knew him to be very private. He had secretly knocked out a wall panel in the apartment off the laundry room and expanded the apartment into the attic. He added an extra bedroom, and that's where he spent a lot of his time. Anyway, one day, Jack didn't show up for work. People were concerned, but they looked in his apartment, and he wasn't there, so they assumed he left. A few days later, people below reported a bad smell in their office. The fire department and police came and found Jack's body in the secret room that he built. No one had seen it before because the room was behind a hidden door. He'd been dead for almost 5 days. My grandfather was the man they brought in to replace Jack. My mother was out of college at the time and went to Louisiana to visit her parents. My grandmother made Jack's room into a guest bedroom because the apartment was small and they needed the space. My mother was aware of what happened, but my grandmother told her that the room was all right. That's where my mother stayed. The first night, she told my grandmother that she wanted the bedroom door left open so she could get to the bathroom easier. In the middle of the night, she woke up to the jiggle of the doorknob. She turned around to look, and the door was shut. She panicked, but laid there to see if it would stop. When it didn't stop, she decided to face her fears. She ran to the door and opened it. Nothing was there. So she went to sleep on the couch. Another night, my mother was sleeping in Jack's room. She had a dream that a dead man was on the ceiling watching her. His eyes were bulging, staring at her. The next day, as she described the man and what he was wearing, multiple people told her that's what Jack wore almost every day. The description matched. Ghosts or no ghosts, that room was a creepy place to be, and supposedly, it never quite smelled right. My dog is very old, but still alive. She's a 13-pound miniature poodle who's about 15 years old. That's to say, she sleeps a lot. Most of the time, really, but especially at night. Last night, I was in bed reading in the dark when I thought I felt my dog walking around my bed to try to jump onto it. I felt the vibrations of her movement and heard the pitter-patter of her feet. Getting into my bed at that time would have been unusual for her because she's already laid down to sleep. What caught my attention was when I thought she'd actually jumped onto the bed, but then there was no dog. I froze for a moment, then turned the lights on. My dog was sleeping in her bed on the floor and probably hadn't moved for hours. Something didn't feel right, so I sat up and looked around for a minute. Then I looked over at my rat cage, which was high off the ground, and saw that one of my rats was outside the cage, sitting on top of it as if she'd been placed there. It's a metal cage, and no one escaped before or since. It couldn't have been a rat trying to get on my bed, because once she'd reached the floor there would have been no way for her to get back to the cage. I don't know what's going on, but I have thought of a few possibilities. 1. I've been sick and dehydrated. It could have been a hallucination. Can't explain the rat, though. 2. Some entity was messing with me and my animals. Or 3. A residual haunting of my dog getting on my bed, and an escaped rat. A spirit, ghost, or angel may have saved my mother's life. Some background info. This is a story my mother told me a couple of years ago. When she was just out of college, she was very poor, and so she moved into a bad part of town until she could save some money. There had been a series of break-ins and rapes nearby, as well as several murders. No suspects had been arrested. One day, she was carrying her laundry in from the laundromat, and a dog appeared at her door. She said it looked like a white German shepherd with no collar, but healthy, so it was likely someone's pet. The dog made eye contact but showed no other signs of aggression. She let it sniff her hand and wagged its tail once. It seemed friendly enough, and thinking it was lost, she let it in to give it some food and water. The only food she had at the time was some hot dogs, so she put a bowl of water on the floor and grabbed a hot dog to feed it. The dog watched her the whole time. It didn't seem too interested in the hot dog, but gently took it in its mouth, turned around, and calmly walked out of the apartment. Later that night, my mother heard a noise from the bushes outside the bedroom window. She was afraid someone was trying to break in. She then heard barking and yelling coming from that same area. She knew she should have immediately called the police, but was too scared to move. She waited until the noise stopped and then she called. When the police arrived, they found that her window screen had been cut open with a knife. There was blood and white dog fur all in the bushes, and fur covering her nearby front porch. My mother realised that the dog had slept out front of her apartment all night until the man tried to break in. She believes that the dog was a guardian angel sent to protect her. And since then, she's been kind to every dog she meets. I'm not sure what really happened there, but whatever that dog was, my mother was very fortunate to have it on her side. So for background, I live with my family and we all find paranormal stuff ridiculous and illogical, right? I was never too firm in my refusal of anything else being out there. I'm skeptical, but benefit of the doubt, right? Nothing is impossible, yada yada. But I thought more likely than not, people are just making things up when they talk about paranormal experiences. I had never experienced anything paranormal, but one of my friends swears that this shit is real, and they've experienced unexplainable things. I should probably go to her about this if I'm being honest, but she's out of the country and she isn't online. So I thought, being the lurker that I am, there must be someone on here that talks about this stuff. And here I am. So myself and another friend who also doesn't believe in this stuff, we went round to her house and started playing some games. Not like Ouija boards or anything, because that's the point in buying something for stuff we don't believe in. We were playing these stupid fucking games and making fun of them and all this crap. Eventually, my friend just starts saying stuff out loud, asking stupid questions and doing like a mock ghost session thingy, and it was pretty funny. We were bored. And so everything is fine until she asks whatever to start doing things. Like pushing objects off shelves and knocking pictures off walls or moving things or turning off lights. And so nothing's happening. And I think it's pretty funny because she looks so stupid, just speaking to the air like that. So I join in and we're laughing, and it's funny. Until her water bottle falls off of her desk. Weird coincidence. Kind of scary, but it was probably the wind or gravity. There are so many explanations. There wasn't much water left in it anyway, so it barely weighed anything. Her beside light kind of flickers too, but again, electricity, power cuts, you catch my grift. I'm kind of lost the mood. I'm feeling a little creeped out because of weird timing, but this stuff just eggs my friend on. She's grinning and laughing while joking about things touching us, like giving permission, I guess. I was a little weirded out, but again, not exactly anything I firmly believe in. And even if it did, she can't give permission for me, so it's her funeral. That was my thought process anyway. So we kind of just stopped the jokes and the games there and decided to watch a movie instead. The whole thing just kind of left my mind, to be honest. I went home, showered, and went to sleep. Everything was fine, nothing out of the ordinary at all. I had no dreams, I wasn't scared, I'm genuinely just so confused right now. So anyway, I wake up and my forearm kind of aches and hurts a bit, but it could just be a morning pain or whatever, and it would go away. So I go to the kitchen to make myself some breakfast and get dressed and everything. Then, when I'm changing my shirt, I see fucking scratches or something, and like bruises and stuff on my arm. So I'm confused. And I think that they weren't there yesterday, and I didn't do anything yesterday to get these, so what the fuck? So I texted my friend who I was with yesterday, and she's confused as fuck as well, and is totally weirded out. But she shrugs it off and then jokes about it being like a ghost or something from yesterday. I kind of just went, ha, yeah, and we both went offline. So I kind of just sat there for a bit, no thoughts, just this building feeling of panic, and just... So I went outside, and here I am still. I texted my ghost-obsessed friend, but they didn't reply. So this is my last resort. That was until this incident occurred in 2015. I was visiting a friend in Portland for the weekend. Halloween weekend, as cliche as that sounds. The house my friend lived in with several other housemates was old. Everything creaked and groaned, especially at night. I wish I knew how old it was exactly, but I don't. On my initial tour of the house, I noticed it had a laundry chute from the upstairs bathroom leading to the basement cellar, where there are laundry machines and a bunch of old spooky furniture from residents past moulded and sat, getting covered in dust and spider webs. They never touched the old stuff, but it was there. I was in my mid-20s then, and was getting ready to go out with my buddy to a basketball game, then hit the bars. Whilst putting on my Halloween makeup in the bathroom mirror, I felt this odd sensation, this stillness. Then, in the pit of my stomach, I felt anxious butterflies. The kind of thing you feel when you're playing hide and seek, and you can see the seeker from where you're hiding, and they're moments away from finding you. I was kind of frozen in this trance for a moment when all of a sudden, a full roll of toilet paper tipped out from the rest of the pack, went onto its side on the floor, and began to unravel. With absolutely no draft in that bathroom, no fan, no gust of wind, this brand new roll of toilet paper just began to move and unravel by itself. And it was unraveling down the laundry chute. I stood there, eyeliner in hand, poised against my eyelid, watching this toilet roll unravel through the mirror in which I was doing my makeup. When it finally made it to the end of the roll, the cardboard inner roll just spun around in a circle for what felt like forever, and then stopped. I kept standing there for a moment, unsure what just happened. Suddenly, my friend knocked on the bathroom door, which startled me. "Hey, is everything okay in there?" I came out looking super pale, and he's like, "What's wrong?" I told him what happened, and he looked at me funny. He told me he was just in the basement and saw a ream of toilet paper come streaming down and fold over itself in a perfect zigzag. He led me downstairs, and sure enough, I saw the unraveled roll of toilet paper neatly folded over itself, with no one side being any longer than another. He kept telling me, "Seriously? You're telling me you didn't do that?" And he finally believed me after some convincing. He thought I was doing it and came up to check on me, thinking I was just playing around with toilet paper for some reason. But neither of us has been doing anything to provoke this incident. This started off with me relaxing and watching one of my favourite shows, The King of the Hill. During this, I fell asleep unintentionally. I entered a dream state, but thought I was still awake. Eventually, I would realise I couldn't move. I fell asleep laying on my stomach, and I couldn't move anything but my eyes. It felt like something was pushing me down. I moved my eyes towards the TV, and I could still see and hear everything going on in the show I was watching. Things started to get dark and blurry. I could feel something poking me on my rear end, and that's when I really started to get scared. I was stuck in this position and felt powerless, but I kept telling myself, "You gotta turn over. You gotta turn over." The feeling of this entity felt so entirely real and physical. I tried yelling but couldn't. Suddenly, I felt that I could move my left arm. With all my might, I did a punching motion while twisting over onto my back, and that's when I saw the entity for a few seconds, right before waking up. The best way for me to describe it was vibrational. The entity could feel that I had seen it, and it got up quickly and quickly shot out of the room. It was like a dark, big, blurry vibrational thing. Think about how invisibility is portrayed in movies and TV. It was like that. Almost like the cloak in Harry Potter, but it's a little darker. Right as this entity shot out of the room is when I had awoken from this dream state. One of the freakiest parts about this was how everything in the room was identical in waking life and in dream life. Everything from how my water bottle was positioned to the episode of the show I was watching. While I was in this dream state, I could make out details of every little thing in the room. It was vivid. I was really shaken up from this, and now afraid to fall asleep in this room. Luckily, I haven't had any sleep paralysis since then. It's something I can never forget. My great-grandmother Emily owned a house on Glenwood Avenue in Owasso, Michigan. She was fairly well off, so she let my mom's mother move into the house when she was falling on hard times with her husband and their kids. And my Gigi Emily moved out. I'm going to try to make this as easy to understand as possible, to who is who. So I'm going to lay out who moved into the house first. My grandma Pat, which is my mom's mom, has 3 kids. Charlotte, my mom, Chris and James. She was married to a man named Butch who also had 3 kids, Sandy, Lee, and Greg. These are all events that my mom and Grandma Pat both separately told me about throughout my life. I'm now 22 and have told my friends about them through the years, and I've been reading these posts and have decided to share the experiences I've learned about. They're 100% true. So before I start speaking about what happened before my mom, I want to share a bit about what happened to my great-grandmother Emily when she lived there. She told my grandma that some strange things had been happening in the house. When she was in bed, it felt like a cat walked over her and she had no animals. Also, she told my grandma that something would tug her blanket at the end of her bed and she would have to clutch it onto it or it would be pulled off. Water would also run in the bathroom constantly and she would have to get up and turn it off throughout the night. My mom moved into the house and she made some friends around the neighborhood. They would tease her about how a witch lived there before and did witchcraft in the basement and said the house was haunted. My mom brushed it off, thinking they were just trying to scare her. My mom said that her and her stepsister Sandy shared a room, and she said that red glowing eyes would look at them in the closet. My mom said that they would be so scared that they would sleep in the same bed, and Sandy even ran and flicked on the light and moved the toys around in the closet, thinking it was just a light. But as soon as the light would flick back off and Sandy got back into bed with my mom, they would reappear. My mom told me that they would pull long black hairs from the drywall leading to the staircase, and that the drywall would literally just crumble. My mom told me that one night, my grandma Pat was waiting for her husband Butch to get home. She was watching TV in the living room, and she was laying on a pull-out bed. She sat up to get a drink of water and had her feet on the floor, and something grabbed her ankle and squeezed and shook it so hard from underneath the bed that it left a bruise. She looked under the bed thinking it was one of the kids, and she saw that nothing was there. So she yelled for my mom to come out there with her until her husband got home. She told my mom what happened, and they were both terrified. I asked my grandma about this, and she told me the exact same thing. My grandma also told me that she saw large black figures in the home multiple times. I just got off the phone with my grandma to try and get everything as accurate as possible. She didn't have much time because she was at work, and she did tell me that a man hung himself in the basement, and she would see things in the kitchen a lot, like large black figures. The basement door was in the kitchen. She said that my mom would too, to the point that she would scream and cry multiple times from the age of 2.5. She told me that they moved out once because of the weird shit that was going on, and someone else moved in for a while. But they had to move back several years later, which was when she grabbed from under the bed. She said something grabbed my ankle and shook the hell out of it. My great-grandmother Emily owned the house the entire time, which is why they ended up back there. She also said that her son James saw the red glowing eyes, and all of the other kids would hear and see things constantly. But after things got physical with her when it grabbed her ankle, she got the hell out of there for good. She also said that renters wouldn't stop moving out of the house very quickly until someone purchased it some years later and had it blessed. She thinks they're still living there to this day. When I was around 15, my mom told me about this again because it was all so scary and interesting to me. I would have my mom retell me everything that happened in the house all the time, and I ended up finding the house online. While I was searching through articles to see if any information was available about the house, I found that right down the street was Rosevere Park, and it's said to be one of the most haunted places in Owasso. I'm not sure if it has any correlation with the house, but I just thought that was strange. When I was around 16, my stepdad worked as a mover. Someone he moved gave him this colourful hand-painted canvas of Marilyn Monroe. He took it home for me as a gift. My stepdad spent a lot of time down in the workshop in our basement when he wasn't at work. One day, when my mum and him were down there, I came down to ask my mum a question. I saw the canvas sitting against the wall, and I asked where it came from. My stepdad explained to me that he was going to give it to me as a gift, but for some reason, my mum didn't like it at all. She had no reason. My mum tried telling me she didn't want me to have it, but since I already saw it and wanted it, it would have been kind of ludicrous to keep it from me, since it was technically for me. I ended up hanging it on my room above my bed. We had a ranch-style house, and my bedroom was at one end of the house. The house was basically long and kind of narrow. Our basement was open, and the size of the long, narrow house, it was unfinished with brick walls that were painted a bright orange with concrete floors. It had 5 lights on the ceiling that went straight down the basement with drawstrings hanging from them to flick them on and off. It had 2 rooms off of the long corridor, both unfinished. One was the workshop, and one was where the water heater was. The staircase to our basement was directly on the opposite side of the house from my bedroom. That night, I had 3 horrible, stressful nightmares, like the ones that make you wake up, trying to catch your breath. This continued for the next 3 days. In one of my dreams, my bed sank through the floor into the very back of the basement, directly below my bedroom. The basement was pitch black. I knew something was in there with me. I felt like I couldn't breathe because of sheer panic. I got up from my bed and instantly started rushing to try to get up the stairs on the opposite side of the basement, with something that felt so sinister chasing right behind me. I knew the creature was small and black because I saw it when I reached the bottom step because of the light that came through the crack of the basement door. I woke up before it could touch me, sweating, trying to catch my breath. For whatever reason, I connected my dreams to the painting by the 3rd day. It was in my head by the 2nd day, but I ignored it because I liked the painting. I thought that was kind of ridiculous to even think about, not fully knowing spirits can be connected to objects. I've always been super intuitive, Several of my aunts and great aunts on my dad's side were self-proclaimed witches, and I think it's just something that runs in the family to this day. My mom was a Christian woman, and we attended a Baptist church basically my whole life at that point. I told my mom, laughed, and said that it was probably just in my head, and that everyone had nightmares once in a while. I knew it was connected to the painting, so asked her to put it in her room. She thought it was silly, but ultimately agreed with it. Alright, we'll see. I placed the painting in her room against the wall, nearest to the side of the bed she slept in. Shockingly, she too had 3 horrible, stressful dreams. I remember her saying that one was one about kittens that were very sick and crusted shut eyes and flies all over them. She said it made her have an overwhelming feeling of complete and utter dread. She told me that she knew it was the painting too at that point and understood exactly what I was talking about. She immediately got it out of the house and the dream stopped. I asked her several years later what she did with it. She told me she ended up putting the painting in the trunk of her car and got sketched out within a few days of having it in there, and ended up stopping on the side of the road while driving, putting it at the end of someone's driveway for the garbage man to pick up. My family moved to a house in Swartz Creek, Michigan in 2004. It was my dad, Ronald, my mom, Charlotte, my sisters, Shira and Chelsea, my brothers, Ronnie and Dylan, and I. My name is Sabrina. I'm now 22, and this all happened between the ages of 9 and 11. Everything was fine until I think like 2007. My dad started getting super sick and jaundiced. Basically, his skin and the whites of his eyes were turning yellow. His mom came over and they were searching online trying to figure out what could be wrong with him, and the only thing that would come up was articles on cancer. He got checked out at his doctor's, and lo and behold, he had an aggressive form of pancreatic liver cancer. My dad was super healthy before all of this, so it was a huge shock. A few months later, my sister Shira started to get sick as well, and she was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a form of cancer as well. Really long story short, my dad ended up passing away 2 years later on March 27th, 2009. But it was only after my sister went into remission because he told her that he wasn't going to die if she was sick. After his passing, my other older sister Chelsea moved out of state to live with my uncle James in Washington state. So fast forward a bit. At this point, my dad had been passed away for nearly 6 months. Shira was home alone. My sister Chelsea told me that Shira called her frantically sobbing, saying that she had just seen my dad in the kitchen with his head down, crying. She was freaked out, saying that something had to be wrong and she didn't know what the hell was going on. 2 weeks later, Shira ended up in the hospital. The cancer had spread basically throughout her whole body. She was in the hospital for a few days, and I had just turned 11, so my mom didn't want me at the hospital, so really I had no clue what she was even admitted. I was just at a friend's house for a couple of days, which wasn't unusual for me. My brother Ronnie was at the hospital with my mom because he was 17. Ronnie told me that Shira had a tube down her throat, but she could still use her phone to type out what she wanted to say. She was awake, but weak. She pointed to the corner of the room and was trying to communicate, so he gave her the phone. She typed out to him that heaven and God were real, and that my dad was in the room along with my dad's dad, who passed away in like 2001. He asked her what they wanted, and she pointed to herself. She passed away within the next 24 hours on September 20th, 2009, at the age of 19. I know you can say that Shira was probably delusional or whatever, because she was about to die. But get this. While all of that was going on in the hospital, Chelsea was still living in Washington, and she got the earliest flight she could to get back to Michigan. The night Shira died was the night before Chelsea was leaving to come home. Chelsea was on the phone with my mom and Ronnie constantly, so she was up super late, and she had an early flight. She said she was just so exhausted from trying to make sure she knew everything that was going on with Shira in the hospital, that she accidentally fell asleep for about an hour. She said that she had a dream that my dad and his cousin Jennifer came to her in her dream, saying that Shira died and that she was with them now and that she's okay. That dream woke Chelsea up because that last she knew Shira was alive, and it freaked her out. Just a few moments after she woke up, my Ronnie called her saying Shira just passed away, and all Chelsea could say was that she already knew and told her about the dream. This story is true, and my mom told it to me plenty of times over the years. I also know this sounds super far-fetched because we only hear about this type of shit on TV, but it actually happened. When I was a baby, my mom attended a small, close-knit Baptist church in Flint, Michigan. The church had only about 15 to 20 people that would come regularly, so everyone knew each other. The pastor was close to our family in particular because my dad was in and out of jail constantly. My dad didn't attend church, but my mom was a dedicated Christian. All of this information came directly to my mom from our pastor and Valerie herself. I was born in August of 1997, so I'm assuming this took place around 1998, because my mom said I was a baby at the time, and she was breastfeeding me still. My mom befriended a thin, middle-aged woman named Valerie that was newer to our church. She would come now and again because her husband started to come regularly. Before I get into all this, I just know that I understand that all witchcraft is believed to be good. Everyone has their own beliefs, so don't come for me. Valerie came from a line of witches. She owned various spell books, Ouija boards, and other items that were passed down from her mother and grandma, etc. She practiced black magic religiously. She used her Ouija board daily to make all of her decisions, down to what she ate, what she bought, and what she was going to do for the day. She attended our church a handful of times and decided she wanted to convert to being a Baptist. Baptists don't get involved with black magic, so she decided she wanted to give up using her books and boards. Our church held services on Sundays and Wednesdays. As she started coming more regularly, she started getting sick and vomiting about an hour before each service, every week. She was beginning to see black figures constantly in her house and experiencing a lot of unexplained occurrences in her everyday life. People from our church noticed that she wasn't coming anymore and started to ask her husband if she was okay, because she was on the prayer list under unspoken, meaning nobody knew what was going on, just that she needed prayers. Eventually, our pastor started to speak to her husband, and her husband told our pastor about her past and how she was vomiting before service every week. He got very concerned and asked if she would come to service even if she got sick. My mom said she would sit in the very back section and literally vomit into a bucket the entire service. This happened for several weeks until she agreed to attend a meeting with our pastor, her husband, and a few of our deacons. After she went into detail about what she was experiencing, they came to the conclusion that she may be possessed. They told her an exorcism may be the only thing to help her. After she agreed, they all left from the church to go into her house to collect all of her books and tools she used for many years as the first step to help her. They decided to perform the actual exorcism the following day. During the exorcism, she sat down on a chair in our church, and as soon as they began reading from the Bible, she began foaming at the mouth and growling. She started getting violent, so they had to physically hold her down. But as soon as they did, she started literally throwing the grown men around. Mind you, she was 100 pounds. It took several hours, but they decided to end it because it seemed to have worked. The following couple of days after that, her son was complaining that he was still seeing shadows in his room. So our pastor decided to come and check it, if accidentally anything was left behind. Whatever negative energy or demon that was in her or her house still ended up being attached to a book in her son's room that had a unicorn on it, because after they found and removed the black shadows, stopped showing up in her house. After all of that, she attended church without any issues and was still there when we left to go to a different church closer to our house when I was around 6 years old. Again, all of this information came from my mom, directly from Valerie and our pastor. My fiance and I, for the past year approximately, have thought something was in our apartment, besides just us. And it started out with once in a while just hearing different noises. We thought it was our cat just knocking something over, or a plate just sliding. But anytime we would check it out, the cat wasn't in the room, and nothing was moved or fallen over. So over the next few months, my fiance got pregnant, and I'll go more into that. But all of a sudden, my cat was scared to go through the hallway, and he started to go through the hallway that divides all the rooms like a bat out of hell to get from the kitchen and living room. And once in a while, we would see shadow figures around the same spot. He wouldn't like to be near. And we just told each other it's nothing mean to us or doing anything negative towards us. So we just went on with life as always. And we got along so good and started getting ready for the baby to be born. But as time went on, we started to see more shadows and we just started arguing. And we're always on edge with each other and just really hatred towards each other and act like people we didn't even know anymore. I'm trying to move this along though and still let you know about some things that were happening. The baby was born and the cat just started acting very standoffish and was just very annoying and do anything that would upset us. And we thought it was just because the baby was here now, but that wasn't the case. And one night, I was playing with the baby and I was doing bicycles with him, and the bassinet had a melody playing. And I would say run, run, run to my son. And when I heard something else say what I was saying, that freaked me out really bad. And my cat was acting so bad that I actually was trying to find him a new home. And I had him for 5 years. He turned into a cat that I didn't know. And me and my fiancée were still being very negative towards each other, to the point where it was almost finished. But I finally did find my cat a home, and when he left, the house seemed so much quieter, and almost seemed like the house was a new house. And me and my fiancée both thought the same thing about the difference in the house, and we stopped arguing, and it was just very pleasant. We're both thinking that something either was attached to the cat, or followed him to the new home. And we always thought people were lying on TV when they would say the house felt lighter. But whatever was going on stopped 100% when the cat left. So I'm not exactly sure what was going on. I attend college in a small town that has a fairly colourful history. The student houses are very old and unkempt due to the lack of care from landlords. My sorority house lies within the old student houses, and it looks like a southern plantation home, white with tall pillars and a wraparound porch. This house has 8 bedrooms, 2 kitchens, and 2 bathrooms, so it's a fairly large home. I've never resided in the sorority house personally, but I have spent a great deal of time in that house, and have heard countless stories of what I believe are paranormal happenings. My first time at the sorority house was when I was a new member of the sorority. I had received a tour of the house, which included the bedrooms, common areas, guest room, and attic. The second I stepped up onto the second floor, I could feel a change in the atmosphere. The air seemed cold and eerie. My sorority sisters took me down a long and dark hallway, showing me bedroom after bedroom, until we finally reached the end of the hallway. At the end of the hallway was the guest room. This room in particular felt super odd. Maybe it was the strange shape of the room, or the fact that the attic door was in that room. Continuing on the house tour, the sisters of the sorority asked me if I wanted to see the attic. I said yes, despite the warnings of it being really creepy and unsettling. I followed one of the sisters up the steep dark stairs. The light switch was at the very top, so we used a flashlight to find our way up, which only added to the scary feeling of the attic. Once we got to the top and the light was switched on, I noticed that the walls were covered in cardboard that had a bunch of writing all over it. The attic was so strange. It felt like it didn't belong to the rest of the house, almost like I stepped into a completely different world. Eventually, the tour had ended, but my strange feelings toward the guest room and attic didn't. The more and more time I spent at the sorority house, the deeper my paranormal experiences grew. There was one night I was alone in the house with one other sister. Everyone had left for summer vacation, but my sorority sister and I happened to be visiting the college town, so we decided to meet up for a wine night at the sorority house. We were sitting at the kitchen table, which was right next to one of the staircases leading up to the second floor. We were just chatting, goofing around, and sipping on our cheap wine when we heard a loud thud come from the second floor. We brushed it off, thinking it was just the house settling. We continued to have a good time, and then we heard the thud again and the sound of something metal dragging across the floor above us. We sat and listened quietly for a bit. The dragging stopped, but the sound of footsteps on the creaky floors soon followed. The footsteps sounded like they were coming closer to the top of the staircase. I looked at my sorority sister dead in the eyes, and we both knew that we needed to get out of the kitchen, away from the stairs. So, we ran into the living room and sat on the couch, staring into the kitchen. Some time had passed since the noises had stopped, so we decided to go investigate. We walked up the stairs and investigated the bedrooms and bathrooms. There was no sign of a disturbance until we went into the second floor kitchen. On the floor of the kitchen were two metal baking sheets that looked like they had fallen out of the cupboard. The cupboard door was open, and one baking sheet was found all the way across the kitchen floor, and the other one was found underneath the kitchen table. We picked up the baking sheets, closed the cupboard, and got the hell out of the sorority house for the night because we were so freaked out. Next, my sorority decided to do a giant sleepover at the house for a bonding experience. After playing games and watching movies, we decided to turn it in for the night, around 2 a.m. The only beds that were left open were the two twin beds in the dreaded guest room. Everyone hated sleeping in the guest room because it felt so creepy in there, but I was so tired that I didn't care where I slept at that point. As I was falling asleep, I could feel someone gently pulling on the blanket from the end of the bed. Thinking it was a prank, I switched on the bedside lamp to see who it was pulling the blanket, to see that no one was there. I brushed it off as being tired and tried to fall back asleep. About an hour had passed when I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the creaky floorboard, steps to the attic, and my blanket fell completely off the bed. The footsteps were really loud, almost like stomping. I sat up staring at the door when the doorknob to the attic started moving on its own, and the door started shaking. There's a chain door guard on the door, so it would be hard for someone to be on the inside of the attic with the guard still in place. It felt like an eternity before I felt comfortable enough to leave the bed to sleep somewhere else. The next morning, I was telling some of the other sisters about the attic door, and someone else had shared with me that they had an awful nightmare that night about a man trying to get them to come into the attic. She said that the man in her dream felt evil. Another one of my sisters mentioned that there was a journal that had a collection of paranormal stories that had happened since my sorority moved into the house, since the late 90s.